Welcome, dear listener, wherever you are. Wherever you've come from today, you're here now, and that's enough. This is your time to slow down, to listen, to rest. If you'd like to, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It always amazes me how far this quiet little circle of history lovers has grown. How many of you are out there, drifting off to sleep with stories of the past? Tonight, we'll set sail, not on turbulent seas, but on a calm tide of time. Together, we'll journey into the world of the Vikings, not the clashing swords or fire-lit raids often told in movies, but the true rhythms of life in the Norse world. Rough, cold, communal, and strangely poetic. We'll begin with the creak and sway of a longship beneath your feet as you take your place among a crew of hardened sailors. Later, we'll step quietly into the life of Leif Erikson, less a conqueror than a wanderer shaped by land, legacy, and silence. We'll trace the secrets of a buried ship, preserved not in legend, but in soil. And finally, we'll peer inside the smoky halls of a Viking chieftain, where power was carved not only with blades, but with words, gifts, and long, quiet feasts. So take a breath. Let the lights of the modern world fade. You're about to cross into the north, where time moved to the rhythm of waves, wind, and waiting. Let's begin. Imagine waking up before the sun has even considered rising. The air is thick with mist, clinging to your skin like a second colder layer. There is no blanket, no mattress, no fire to warm your fingers. Only a damp woolen cloak pulled tight over your shoulders and the hollow ache of sleep interrupted too early. Your bed? Rough planks. Your pillow? If you're lucky, a bundle of your extra tunic or a coiled length of rope. Beneath you, the wooden boards creak and shift gently, a reminder that you're not on solid ground. You're aboard a Viking longship. The light is dim, gray, and smeared across the sky like ashes. The sea murmurs quietly all around, a sound both constant and unknowable. You're one of a crew of 30, maybe more, all crammed onto a slender vessel no wider than a large room. Elbow to elbow, knee to knee. Personal space is a forgotten luxury. And there is work to do. No one rings a bell to signal the start of your day. There are no clocks, no schedules. Just the murmur of movement and the instinctive knowledge that you must get ready. If you're slow, the overseer will notice. He always does. There is no breakfast, not as you might know it. A few hard wafers of barley bread, stiff and crumbly. Perhaps a bit of dried fish, preserved with salt, which you'll gnaw on like leather. If you're lucky, a thin soup, made from whatever could be boiled the night before, in a blackened pot slung low over the coals on shore. You eat sitting on the same planks you slept on. There's no ceremony to it. And then come the oars. Each man has his bench, his place. Long, smooth, sea-worn handles that stretch out over the edge of the ship. They're heavy, thicker than your wrist. When you grip one, your palms immediately remember the blisters from yesterday and the day before that. There is no room for pride or for pacing yourself. The order is given, and together, you row. 1, 2, 1, 2. The rhythm is drilled into you not with a whip, but with silence. Everyone knows when the timing is off. The ship stutters forward like a stalling animal. The sea punishes any mistake. And so, in cold unity, you work. The sound of rowing fills the world. Water slapping against the hull. Oars slicing through the sea. Wood groaning under tension. Your breath, labored and hot in your throat, steams in the morning chill. You row for hours. Sometimes there is wind, and the sail can be raised. A great square of linen, dyed red or striped, catching the breeze and giving your arms a break. But the sea is fickle, and more often than not, you row. You row through calm waters and through choppy ones, through icy spray and long, breathless stretches where the horizon never seems to change. There is no cover from the elements. The longship is open to the sky. Rain falls, soaking everything. The sun beats down, turning your scalp raw. Sea spray salts your skin until you itch under your clothing. Your cloak never truly dries. There is little conversation. What is there to say? You share grunts, quiet curses. The occasional story, muttered low, passed between men to stave off monotony. Tales of sea monsters, of gods walking among men, of warriors who saw distant lands and brought back silver, spices, or scars. Sometimes you dream about land, a flat, green field, a fire, bread still warm. But when your eyes open, there is only water. When the midday break comes, if it comes, it is brief. You pull in your oars and rest your hands. Fingers swollen, wrists throbbing. You eat again. More bread, more dried meat. If someone caught a fish with a crude line, you might share a few bites of something fresh. But usually not. You do not wash. There is no soap and no privacy. If you relieve yourself, you do it over the side of the boat with as much dignity as you can muster, trying not to lose your balance. The sea does not forgive clumsiness. And then, back to work. The hours stretch, indistinct. The sky darkens, then brightens, then darkens again. You lose track. Days at sea are strange. Time slides into itself. Conversations repeat. Your thoughts become a dull hum, broken only by the effort of survival. Your arms are strong, but sore. Every movement is done in rhythm, yet your mind drifts. You think of home, perhaps, a farm, a wife, a sibling, or maybe nothing at all. Maybe you think only of the motion, of the pull and the push, of the endless sea. There are dangers, of course, not the ones from stories, krakens, or angry gods, but the real ones. Storms that can rise out of nowhere, slamming your small vessel with walls of water, sails torn like parchment, oars snapped clean in half, and no lifeboats, no beacons. Just you, the cold, and your wits. Sometimes, a man falls overboard. In calm waters, you might turn back. In rough seas, there's no time. You row on, and he becomes a story for later. Night falls slowly in the north. The sun lingers just below the horizon, smearing the sky with long streaks of red and violet. You drop anchor in a shallow bay or along a rocky coast. No ports, no towns, just isolation. You disembark, boots slipping on wet stones. A fire is lit, not for warmth. It barely does that, but for cooking. Smoke hangs low and heavy. The meal is the same. Porridge, maybe. Boiled roots. Something bland, filling and forgettable. There are no tents. You sleep on the ground, in your cloak, surrounded by the same men you've worked beside all day. The stars above feel enormous, indifferent. You drift to sleep with the scent of damp earth in your nose. Your muscles ache, your hands are raw, and yet, it's only the beginning. Tomorrow, you rise again with the cold. Again, the oars. Again, the sea. There are no laurels for you, no sagas to be sung in your name. You're not a warrior, not a chieftain, just a sailor, just a man trying to endure. And yet, somehow, this rhythm, this aching, endless, windswept rhythm, is what carved the Viking world into history. You can still hear the creak of the hull behind your ears, the splash of oars that never quite stop. Now, let's turn our attention to a different journey, less backbreaking, but no less daunting. The voyage of a single man, shaped by both myth and memory. Let's quietly follow Leif Erikson across the edge of the known world. So now, imagine, if you will, that instead of waking on damp planks between oarsmen, you are the son of a legend. The air in Greenland is colder than the sea ever was. Crisp, sharp, and dry. The wind sighs across open slopes of stone and moss, stirring the heavy skins that hang in doorways. It smells like salt and lichen, and sometimes, faintly, of iron. Your name is Leif, son of Eric the Red. And though that name carries weight, it does not carry ease. You were not born in Norway, or even in Iceland, but in the frayed edges of the known world, Greenland, a place of hard people and harder land. Your father came here not by glory, but by exile. Eric the Red was banished from Iceland for killing a man, possibly more than one, and settled across the sea, where snow kisses the earth almost year-round. And so you grow up among ice and salt, among fur and bone, among tales of gods and monsters, of restless seas and distant shores. The sagas are your lullabies, the sagas and the wind. Your life is not easy. You learn to hunt seal on slick rocks. You learn to carve with bone knives, to walk without slipping, to survive. You learn that food can run out, that ships can vanish, that names are earned not in battle alone, but in winter, in hunger, in patience. As you grow, you become curious, not just of the gods or the stories, but of what lies beyond. You listen to the tales told by sailors with frost in their beards. One story lingers in your mind, told by a trader named Bjarni, who claimed to have seen a lush land far to the west, one of green forests and strange creatures. But Bjarni never went ashore. He turned back. He wasn't looking for mystery. You are. And so, at a time when others are content to hold on to what they have, you plan to go further. You purchase Bjarni's ship, an older Nar, broad and steady, and you outfit it not for raiding, not for war, but for something quieter. Discovery. The voyage is long, the sea indifferent. But unlike your father, you are not drawn by rage or exile. You are drawn by wonder. As the days pass, the ocean becomes a slow-moving wall of gray. The horizon merges with the sky. Food is rationed, course adjusted. The men look to you, not with fear, but with a quiet trust. And then, one morning, the green, a shoreline, trees, real trees, tall and deep-rooted, grass that grows untrampled, rivers that murmur instead of roar. It is Vinland, you decide, a place where grapes grow wild and sweet, though the exact truth of that is still debated by scholars today. You build a small camp, a settlement called Leifsbuder. Nothing grand, just a handful of structures, walls of turf and timber, a hearth or two. You and your crew explore gently. You meet native peoples, Skraelings, the sagas call them. But the relationships are fragile. You sense both opportunity and danger. You are cautious. Unlike many in your age, you are not reckless. You don't stay long. You return home to Greenland with stories, with samples, and perhaps with a quiet satisfaction. You do not boast loudly. You do not conquer. You simply return. In time, others follow your path. Your brother Thorvald, your sister Freydis, but their stories are bloodier, tangled in conflict and failure. The land that might have become a Norse province remains instead a memory. The spark of colonization flickers out before it can catch fire. But Leif Erikson's name remains. He becomes a quiet legend, not for what he built, but for how far he saw. He becomes known in time as the first European to set foot in North America, centuries before Columbus. And yet, he does not become a king. He does not raise a city. He simply lives, governs Greenland after his father's death, lives out his years far from the lush coasts he once touched. The sagas say little more about his end. No heroic death, no great betrayal, just the soft, cold fog of time swallowing the rest. But in the silence of those missing pages, there is peace. And perhaps that is what Leif Erikson truly represents. Not the roar of conquest, but the quiet of discovery. Not the glory of war, but the wonder of a new horizon. A gentle step across the sea, and a step back again. His journey is like a breath between centuries, a ripple on the ocean, something soft and real and human. And now, as the longships fade from view once again, let's turn to something deeper still. Not a person, but a puzzle, a mystery older than memory. Let us now drift toward the silent echoes of longship and the archaeological whispers that remain. Let us now shift our gaze from the sea-salted sagas and the men who walk their pages to the earth itself. The ground speaks in its own way, and though it does not shout like swords or sing like skalds, it remembers. Our focus now turns to a small stretch of land on the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, Canada. A quiet place. The trees bend gently in the wind. The grasses shift without complaint, and the soil has a story to tell. This place is called longship. It sits far from the usual path of empire. There are no marble columns here, no standing ruins, no grand inscriptions carved in stone. At a glance, it would appear no different than any other stretch of a windswept coastline. But buried beneath this quiet field, something ancient was waiting. It was the 1960s when two Norwegian archaeologists, Helge Ingstad and his wife Anne Stein, arrived here. Not with certainty, but with a hunch. The sagas spoke of Vinland, that lush western land visited by Leif Erikson. Many had dismissed it as myth or as poetic exaggeration. Grapes in Greenland, they said, impossible. But the Ingstads believed otherwise. And so they searched, slowly, methodically. They listened not just to the tales, but to the whispers of the landscape. Locals had long known of some strange mounded shapes in the earth, rounded outlines, almost too regular to be natural, the kind that linger in the edges of a shepherd's memory. So the archaeologists began to dig, not with haste, not with drama, but with the careful rhythm of trowels, brushes, and patience. And what they found changed the conversation. Beneath the moss and peat were the remains of 8 timber-framed buildings, their foundations made of turf. Not circular, like the dwellings of native peoples, but rectangular. Norse-style longhouses, carefully constructed, aligned with the wind. There were iron nails, forged by hand, and a blacksmith's forge, a remarkable find, as ironworking was not practiced by the indigenous peoples in the area at the time. A bronze cloak pin, unmistakably Norse in design. But most curious of all were the things they didn't find. No signs of permanent settlement, no graves, no weapons of war. This wasn't a village. It was a way station, a place to stop, repair ships, prepare food, maybe spend a season or two. It told of a journey that had happened, but not lasted. Radiocarbon dating confirmed what the sagas had hinted at. The structures dated to around the year 1000 CE. That placed them 500 years before Columbus. The sagas, it seemed, had carried a quiet truth all along. But what, truly, was Vinland? Was this peaceful outpost on the northern edge of Newfoundland the Vinland that Leif Erikson had found? or merely one stop on the way. The sagas describe a land filled with wild wheat, grapevines, and rich pastures. That doesn't match the cold, wind-swept shore of longship meadows. Some scholars believe the Norse may have traveled further south, toward the more temperate zones of Nova Scotia, or even the northern parts of what is now New England. Perhaps Vinland wasn't a single place, but a region, known more by its bounty than its coordinates. A landscape of seasonal camps and cautious exploration. A place they saw, touched, but never fully claimed. The mystery deepens. There are no other confirmed Norse sites in North America. No trails inland, no cities under the soil. Just this one, longship meadows, silent, singular. And that silence is part of what makes it beautiful. You can stand there today, if you wish. The structures have been partially reconstructed with turf walls and wooden frames. It is quiet. The wind still moves across the low hills. The ocean still sings its distant song. The past feels close here, but it does not crowd you. It hums, gently. And if you listen closely, you may hear echoes, not of war horns or royal decrees, but of something quieter. The sound of men working wood and iron, the shuffle of footsteps on grass, the low murmur of a foreign tongue carried across the sea. Longship meadows remains a puzzle. Why didn't the Norse stay? Why didn't they expand? Perhaps the indigenous peoples were too strong, too numerous. Perhaps the trade was not worth the risk. Or perhaps they simply preferred home, the cold stone of Greenland, the familiar rhythm of Icelandic winters, the long evenings by the hearth where stories mattered more than conquest. The Norse were not builders of empires in the New World. They were visitors, respectful in their caution. They came and they left. They left behind no cities, no monuments, just shapes in the soil, a few rusted nails, and a question. But in that question, there is a kind of peace. Because sometimes history doesn't shout, it whispers. And now, as we leave this lonely outpost behind, let us rise once more. This time, not to the frontier, but to the halls of those who stayed behind. The elite, the powerful, the strange leaders of Viking society. Let's turn now to the jarls and queens, the feasting halls, and the sacred spaces of the powerful. Let's leave the muddy fields of the farmers behind for a while and step gently into a different world. The warm, flickering interior of a longhouse, high up the social ladder, where the smell of roasted meat and wood smoke fills the air. Imagine yourself seated near the center hearth, the heart of a Viking noble's home. This is no ordinary house. It stretches long and wide, with raised benches along the walls, carved beams overhead, and tapestries woven with scenes from myth and legend. The longhouse of a jarl, a chieftain, a lord, was a place of power and display. It was where decisions were made, alliances forged, and the wealth of the land made visible, bite by bite, cup by golden cup. The jarls were the ruling class of Norse society. They didn't plow the fields or mend fishing nets. Instead, their lives were built around leadership, war, diplomacy, and the careful maintenance of their status. They were expected to host, and host well. You wouldn't eat alone in a jarl's hall. You'd eat surrounded by others, warriors, seeresses, bards, travelers. And servants would move silently between them, refilling horn cups with mead or ale, slicing bread, or passing carved platters heaped with stews and roast meats. The food wasn't necessarily refined, but it was abundant. Boiled goat, smoked fish, turnip stew thickened with barley, and sometimes, on special occasions, horse meat. Not all Norse people approved of eating horse, but among the Jarls, it sometimes appeared as part of sacred feasts or celebrations. And the drink? The drink was constant. Mead was the favorite, honey wine, often spiced or fermented with herbs. Mead was more than just alcohol. It was mythic. It was said to be a gift from the gods, from Odin himself, the drink of poets and seers. You'd sip it from a horn or a ceramic cup, passed by a servant trained to never interrupt the flow of conversation or verse. Because feasts weren't only about food, they were also about performance. Skalds, Norse poets, would rise to chant sagas, some ancient, some improvised on the spot. These weren't loud, boisterous parties, as modern imaginations might assume. The atmosphere was solemn at times, celebratory at others, but always purposeful. Each toast, each tale, each seat placement had meaning. The Jarl would preside from a central high seat, sometimes flanked by family or trusted warriors. His power wasn't just in the weapons his men bore, but in his hospitality. A good Jarl kept his hall warm and fed. A failing Jarl was whispered about in other halls. Wealth among the Viking elite wasn't shown in the way we might expect today. It wasn't always about gold and jewels, though these did appear, often in the form of ornate brooches, imported silks, or silver arm rings. More often, wealth was shown through generosity, by how many people you could feed, and for how many nights, by how many ships you could fund, how many warriors followed your banner, and how lavishly you honored the gods. Religion, too, was central in these noble halls. Certain feast days were sacred, marked by sacrifices of animals, not people, and invocations to gods like Thor or Freyr. A Jarl was not only a leader in war and peace, but also in ritual. The line between political power and spiritual duty blurred. And at the edge of all this, beyond the carved pillars, beyond the rich furs and firelight, there were still shadows. Envy, vengeance, feuds born over spilled mead or insulted honor. A misstep in the feast could unravel years of alliance. Yet in the moment, in the long, slow stretch of night, with the hall filled with soft conversation and the scent of wood smoke curling lazily up through the rafters, it might have felt timeless, almost peaceful. The kind of peace that only exists when one's power is secure, or seems to be. And perhaps, as you listen, you imagine the slow rise and fall of a skald's voice, the dull clink of a drinking horn against a wooden plate, the quiet shuffle of a servant's feet on packed earth, the rhythm of a world very different from your own. Now, let's gently step away from the hall and out into the cold air once again. We've seen how the elite lived, not always comfortably, but certainly with a different kind of pressure and purpose. From here, we'll explore something else, how these people traveled the seas, and what it truly meant to live your life aboard a longship. Now, imagine waking before dawn, not in a bed, but beneath a sealskin cloak, curled on the hard wooden deck of a longship. The stars above are fading into the pale blue of morning, and the first cold wind off the sea brushes across your face. You're aboard a Viking longship, not a cruise, not a majestic war galley with room for luxuries, but a lean, shallow-drafted vessel, built for speed and shore raids, for river travel and open sea crossing alike. These ships were marvels of design for their time, but comfort was not their aim. Your back aches slightly from the wooden planks. Your cloak is damp. Salt clings to your skin, and your hands are blistered from rowing the day before. There are no cabins on this ship, no galley for cooking, no privacy, You share space with your crewmates, often 30 or more, who all rise with you in the hush of early light. They stretch, rub stiff limbs, pull furs tighter around themselves. No one speaks much. There's little need. Everyone knows what must be done. A fire is lit in a shielded metal pan, a hearth box of sorts, and someone heats up porridge. It smells faintly of barley and smoke. If you're lucky, there's dried fish or preserved goat sausage to chew alongside it. Once the meal is done, the rowing begins again. You grip the oar, cold wood, smoothed by thousands of hands before yours. The rhythm sets in, not quick, but relentless. Row, breathe, row, breathe. A helmsman calls out instructions now and then, and the ship glides steadily across fjord or channel. Above you, the sails flap and stretch. They're made of wool, heavy and coarse, oiled and maintained carefully to withstand wind and spray. The mast creaks slightly, and the ropes, thick and twisted, occasionally hum in the breeze like a distant voice. These ships were light enough to carry, swift enough to evade, and shallow enough to slip up river mouths where no one expected them. That was their genius. But on board, the space was tight, the cold constant, and the sea was not always kind. In good weather, the days were long but manageable. You might switch to sail, and your arms would rest. There would be time for soft chatter, for the playing of a bone flute, or even the carving of runes into the side of the ship to pass the hours. But in foul weather, everything changed. Imagine the sudden shift of clouds. The sky darkens, the wind cuts. The ship begins to rock more violently, waves slapping against its slender hull. Rain stings your face. There is no cover, no cabins, no sleeping quarters, no dry place. Only the open deck, your soaked clothes, and the hope that the helmsman knows his stars. Navigation was an art. Long before compasses, the Vikings relied on the position of the sun, on landmarks, on currents, even on birds and whales. Some say they used sunstones, crystals that revealed the sun's location on overcast days. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps they relied simply on experience, memory, and a bit of luck. And yet, despite the discomfort, the cold, the risk, these ships carried Vikings as far as Baghdad and Vinland, across the Baltic, down the Russian rivers, into the British Isles, and beyond. These voyages were not just about raiding, though raids were frequent. They were also about exploration, trade, ambition, and curiosity. To be part of a longship crew was to belong to something ancient and daring. It required trust in your oar mates, in your chieftain, and in the sea itself. Sometimes, a voyage might last days. Other times, weeks. You slept when you could, ate what you had, faced storms in silence, and if you died, well, it was an honorable way to go. And yet, not every voyage ended in glory. Ships were lost, crews vanished, weather turned. But the memory of these journeys endured in sagas, retold, reshaped, sung in the longhouses of jarls who had perhaps never felt the true cold of ocean spray on their face. As the wind picks up and your hands ache from rowing once again, you think not of conquest, but of home, of hearth smoke, of dry land. But first, the sea must be crossed, as it always has been. And so the longship glides onward, its wake a thin scar on the darkening sea. Let's leave the waves behind for now and step onto firmer land. In our next journey, we'll visit the heart of Viking community life, the quiet rhythm of a village, the shared duties and voices, and the seasonal patterns that define their world. Now, step softly away from the sea, away from the creaking longships and the endless horizon. The salty air gives way to the fresh scent of damp earth and pine. You're walking a narrow path toward a Viking village. Not a great city, not even a town, but a small, clustered community nestled in a valley or tucked along a fjord. There is no gate, no wall. Just a few timber-framed houses, low and sloped, built from wattle, daub, and turf-covered roofs that blend into the land itself. The buildings huddle close together, arranged not in straight rows, but in a pattern shaped by terrain, tradition, and necessity. The village breathes quietly with the rhythm of the seasons. In spring, the thaw comes slowly. Frozen earth softens. Snow retreats from the hills. Streams swell with meltwater, and villagers begin the hard work of preparing the land, turning soil with wooden spades, scattering barley and rye seed, repairing fences, patching boats. Everything smells wet and green, full of promise and exhaustion. In summer, the days stretch long, almost endlessly so, far to the north. There is no time to waste. Fields must be weeded, cattle herded to upland pastures. Wool must be spun and dyed, nets checked, ale brewed. The work is relentless, but shared. Women, men, and children all contribute, each with tasks learned from the generation before. And yet, there are quiet moments. A young girl chasing chickens through a sunlit yard. An elder sitting with her back to a warm stone wall, weaving and humming softly to herself. A dog napping in the dust beside a blackened hearth. Autumn is perhaps the most intense. The entire village works with a quiet urgency. The harvest must be gathered, hay dried, root vegetables buried in storage pits, animals slaughtered, their meat smoked, salted, or dried for the long months ahead. The air is filled with the scent of firewood, of fermenting apples, of blood and smoke and cool soil. And then, winter. Here, in the northern world of the Vikings, winter is no passing chill. It is a season of hardship and waiting. The sun disappears early in the day and returns late, casting everything in blue twilight. Work moves indoors. Wool is spun beside the fire. Tools are repaired. Children play softly in corners, carving toys from scraps of wood. Food is rationed carefully, and fires are banked each night to preserve heat. And through it all, there are stories. Because even more than the land, even more than the sea, the Vikings were shaped by words. Stories passed through generations, whispered, chanted, sung, telling of gods and monsters, of heroes who sailed beyond the edge of the world, of brothers who quarreled and were turned to stone. In the long dark of winter, these tales are a kind of light. By lamplight, someone recites the saga of Eagle Skallagrimson, or of the world tree Yggdrasil, or perhaps even a quiet folk tale about a fox who tricks a bear, soft laughter echoing from the rafters. These villages are not grand, but they are the backbone of Viking society. Everything returns here. The warriors, the traders, the families that stay behind. Here, identity is rooted. The same land worked year after year. The same house repaired through generations. The same hill where ancestors sleep beneath stones. It wasn't easy. Not at all. Illness might pass through the village in a single week. A poor harvest might bring hunger. A raiding party might not return. A neighbor might feud over land, and suddenly peace becomes uneasy. And yet, these villages endured. And as you listen now, imagine the sound of goats bleating softly in their pen, the creak of a door on its wooden hinges, the slow, rhythmic strike of a loom, a kettle hissing gently over a low fire. A quiet world, moving at the speed of breath, of seasons, of memory. We've seen how the Vikings lived together. In our next journey, we'll step into the realm of belief, not only the gods they honored, but the very way they understood fate, magic, and the shape of the universe itself. Now, settle in. Let the sound of the village fade. Let the smoke from hearth fires drift upward and away. We're stepping deeper, not into a place this time, but into a way of thinking, into the inner world of the Vikings, how they understood fate, language, and the unseen threads of their lives. To live as a Viking was to believe that the world was not entirely your own. There were choices, yes, but there was also fate, weird, a force older than the gods, spun by three ancient beings known as the Norns. These sisters sat beside the roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, weaving the destinies of all living things. What they decided was final. Imagine waking up each morning in a world where your future had already been woven. You didn't know what it held, success, failure, death, but you trusted that it had meaning, that it had been written, in a way, before you ever took your first breath. But how could you read such fate? That's where runes come in. Runes weren't just letters, not to the Vikings. They were symbols, ancient and potent. Each one held layers of meaning. Some carved runes into weapons for protection. Others etched them on stones to mark territory or remember the dead. Some even carried runes on their bodies, amulets inscribed with messages for the gods, or spells of strength and luck. Picture yourself sitting in the dim light of a Viking house. A woman kneels beside a cloth, casting rune sticks across its surface. She watches how they fall. Which ones point inward, which outward? She interprets. Slowly, softly, she murmurs words that hint at what's to come. Was it true divination or symbolic reflection? Perhaps both. But to those gathered around, it felt like touching something deeper. Their world was filled with symbols. They believed the universe was made of 9 interconnected realms. Midgard, the world of humans, was only one. Above it, Asgard, home of the gods. Below it, Helheim, the land of the dead. These weren't just ideas. They were lived concepts. Trees were sacred because Yggdrasil was a tree. Rivers mattered because they flowed between worlds. And the gods, they weren't distant deities. They were flawed, emotional, unpredictable, like humans, only more so. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, was both wise and ruthless. He sacrificed his own eye to drink from the well of knowledge and hung himself on the world tree for 9 days to discover the runes. Think of that. A god who suffered, who sought understanding through pain. That was the Viking way, to struggle, to endure, to learn through hardship. There was Thor, protector of mankind, wielding his hammer, Mjolnir, against the giants. Not always clever, but always dependable, a symbol of strength and storm. There was Freya, goddess of love and war, who chose half of the battle slain to dwell in her hall. She was beautiful, yes, but also powerful and often feared. There was no clear line between tenderness and terror in Viking mythology. These stories weren't just entertainment. They explained the seasons, the stars, the tides of fortune. To the Viking mind, every act, planting a field, carving a boat, going to war, had echoes in the spiritual world. You could be cursed, or blessed, or bound by promises made under oath stones and sacred trees. Even death was not the end. If you died bravely in battle, perhaps you would be taken to Valhalla, where Odin's chosen warriors feasted and fought until the end of days. Or perhaps you would dwell in Folkvanger, Freya's realm, a quieter, gentler afterlife. And if you died quietly, at home, or from disease, you might go to Helheim, not a place of fire or torment, but of shadow and silence. A colder place, ruled by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki, whose face was said to be half living, half dead. These beliefs weren't always consistent. They evolved, blended, contradicted, but they shaped every aspect of Viking life, from how they carved stones, to how they faced hardship, to how they told their stories. To live in the Viking Age was to live with the knowledge that unseen forces shaped your path, that the gods watched and sometimes interfered, that every symbol held power, every word could bind, every dream might be a message from something greater. So as the fire dies low and you wrap yourself in your cloak, you might whisper a prayer to Thor for protection, or to Odin for wisdom, or simply trace a rune in the air before you sleep. Let the world tree sway above you. Let the Norns weave, as they always have. And now, let us return from the spiritual world and prepare to look outward once again, to the lands beyond the north, where Viking ships arrived like storms, and where new cultures met, clashed, and occasionally merged. Let us turn now from the cold coasts of Norway and the green valleys of Iceland. Turn your eyes eastward, across the dark waters of the Baltic, along wide, winding rivers that cut through forests and swamps. The air here is different, heavier with humidity, thick with the scent of pine, wet moss, and warm soil. This is not Scandinavia anymore. This is the land of the Rus. It may surprise you to know that not all Vikings pointed their ships west. Some, perhaps many, set their sights on the east, not to conquer, but to trade, to travel, to settle. Their route was not the open sea, but inland, deep into the heart of what we now call Russia and Ukraine. Imagine you are one of them, a Norse trader standing at the prow of a shallow draft longship. The rivers here stretch like veins across the land. The Neva, the Volkhov, the Dnieper, and the Volga. They lead southward, through vast forests, down toward the Black Sea and the glittering cities of Byzantium. The riverbanks are alive. Smoke curls up from Slavic villages, small wooden homes with steep roofs, herds of pigs, and goats wandering freely. Children stop their play to watch your strange ship drift by, their eyes wide and silent. You and your crew carry more than weapons. Your ship is heavy with goods, furs, wax, honey, amber, and slaves captured from raids or bartered from distant tribes. You come seeking silver, silks, spices. You trade with local chieftains or with distant steppe nomads, Khazars, Pechenegs, Bulgars. Some call you Varangians, a name whispered both with fear and with respect. The journey is long and often dangerous. There are places where the rivers become shallow or broken by rapids. You must unload the boat, carry it and its cargo across rough ground to the next stretch of water, a process called portaging. This could take hours, sometimes days. The boat is heavy, the ground is uneven, the heat thick, mosquitoes hum in clouds, and always you keep watch for thieves, for rival traders, for sudden attacks. But you press on. Eventually, if fortune favors you, you reach the great city of Kiev, not yet the capital of a nation, but already a wealthy hub on the trade route to the Byzantine Empire. Here, Norsemen have begun to settle. They do not always remain outsiders. Some marry local women. Some adopt Slavic speech. Some even take Slavic names. It is here that the name Rus first appears, perhaps from an Old Norse word meaning rowers. Over time, it becomes a name for a people, and eventually, a land. These Norse settlers formed the foundation of what will become the early Russian state. Further south still lies the crown jewel of the East, Constantinople. To the Vikings, it is Miklagard, the great city, a place of gold domes and marble streets, towering churches and bustling markets. Here, if you are lucky or skilled, you might enter the service of the Byzantine emperor himself. The Norse made formidable bodyguards, prized for their loyalty and strength. They formed the elite Varangian Guard, sworn to protect the emperor with axe and sword. One Norseman, Harald Hardrada, would serve there, gathering wealth, wisdom, and scars before returning to the north as a king. But that is a story for later. For now, you are a quiet traveler among many. Just one boat among dozens, sliding slowly along the broad green rivers beneath a sky streaked with low-hanging clouds. You hear frogs croak at dusk. You smell wood smoke drifting from campfires. You hear unfamiliar tongues, Slavic, Turkic, Greek. And you realize you are not alone in this world. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were connectors, carriers of goods, of culture, of news. Along these rivers, they brought not just trade, but language, stories, even political power. And though they are often remembered for their violence, here in the East, they were more often builders of bridges, not literal ones, but bridges of movement and exchange. The rivers run slow now. Your boat drifts in silence. Someone is humming at the stern. The trees on the banks bend inward, as if listening. And so, we leave the East behind, for now. Next, we will step into a different kind of encounter. Not with another land, but with an empire. In the next segment, we'll visit the halls of Anglo-Saxon kings and the clash of swords and cultures that came when the Vikings landed in England. Let the riverbanks fade behind you. Let the echoes of Slavic voices and Byzantine gold soften into mist. Now we sail west again, back across the North Sea. A journey not of trade this time, but of something more turbulent. The sea is choppy here. The waves slap rhythmically against the hull. The sky is gray, the wind sharp, and on the far shore, the coast of England waits, not quiet, not empty, but unprepared. The year is 793. You and your companions make landfall at a place called Lindisfarne, a small monastery perched on a tidal island off the northeast coast. It is peaceful, unfortified. The monks have no swords, only books and bells and prayer. And then the raid begins. You are told not to linger too long on the violence, so we won't. But understand this. To the people of England, this moment was seismic. Not just a robbery, but a shattering. A sudden, brutal reminder that the sea was not a wall. The danger could come silently, quickly, and leave as fast as it arrived. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded it with horror. Churches were burned, sacred things taken, monks killed or taken away. The age of the Viking in England had begun, but raids were only the beginning. Over the next few decades, the Norse returned, again and again. Some came for plunder, but others came to stay. They didn't just strike, they settled. Picture it, a Norse family unloading a boat, leading sheep onto the shore. A woman stepping onto English soil with a woven cradle in her arms. A boy pulling a cart of tools. These are not warriors, not only. These are farmers, traders, families, looking to begin again. By the mid-9th century, a large force, known to chroniclers as the Great Heathen Army, swept across England. Not a single raiding party, but a coordinated movement of warriors and settlers. Towns fell, kingdoms trembled. The Anglo-Saxon king, Alfred of Wessex, later known as Alfred the Great, resisted them, not with overwhelming force, but with strategy. He built burhs, fortified settlements. He reformed the military. He even ordered translations of Latin texts into English, believing that knowledge was a weapon too. Still, vast portions of England came under Norse control. This territory became known as the Danelaw, a loose swath of land where Norse customs, laws, and speech blended with Anglo-Saxon life. Walk the streets of a Danelaw town in your mind. You might hear Old Norse and Old English mingling, children shouting both, elders cursing in either. The street names change. By and Thorpe become common. There are new ways of measuring land, new rules about inheritance. It's still England, yes, but subtly different, as if a second heartbeat had been added beneath the first. Not all encounters were hostile. In some towns, marriages between Anglo-Saxons and Norse settlers softened borders. In others, cooperation was more practical. Shared defense, shared land, shared grudges against rival lords. And yet, peace was always fragile. Norse leaders like Guthrum accepted Christian baptism, sometimes sincerely, sometimes politically. Treaties were drawn and broken. Borders shifted. Raids continued, even as communities intertwined. Then came Nut the Great, a Danish king who, through conquest and diplomacy, came to rule not only Denmark, but England, and eventually parts of Norway. He was no mere Viking warlord. He wore a crown, sat on a throne, issued laws in English, married into the old royal line. Nut's reign was not marked by pillage, but by order. For a time, the North Sea became the center of a new kind of empire, where Viking roots and Christian kingship lived, not always comfortably, side by side. When he died, the kingdom fractured. And in time, the Normans, descendants of Norsemen who had settled in France, would conquer England anew in 1066. The Viking Age in England faded, but its traces never left. You can still see it in names. York, once Jorvik, Grimsby, Thorpe Arch. You can still feel it in laws, in legends, in stories told around firelit hearths. You can imagine it now, the twilight field, the grass moving gently. Somewhere nearby, a stone carved with both a cross and runes. The wind speaks softly, in two languages. And so, we drift onward, from conquest to craft. In our next segment, we'll enter the world of Norse shipbuilders, whose boats were more than vessels. They were works of art and tools of transformation. Close your eyes now and listen to the gentle lap of waves against wood, the creak of planks shifting slightly in rhythm with the tide, a gull calling in the distance, a breeze, salt-heavy, gliding across your cheeks. You're standing on a beach, scattered with smooth pebbles and driftwood. Around you, a group of Norse shipwrights are at work, sleeves rolled, brows damp, hands stained with pitch and splinters. Before them rises the slow birth of a longship, spine first, like the skeleton of some great sea creature taking shape. To understand the Vikings, you must understand this. Their ships were not just tools of war or travel. They were a way of life, an extension of the Norse imagination, a symbol of power, freedom, and fate. Let's begin at the source, the forest. The trees were chosen carefully. Oak was prized for strength, pine for flexibility. The builders didn't just chop trees, they read them. They watched how the grain curved, how the knots formed, how the wood felt beneath the axe. Some trees were bent over years into specific shapes, anticipating the needs of a prow or a keel. Each ship began with a keel. a long, sturdy backbone carved from a single trunk. From there, the ribs were added, then the overlapping planks, in a technique called clinker building. This made the hull both strong and flexible, able to ride the waves without breaking. Picture it slowly taking shape, plank by plank, fastened with iron rivets, sealed with wool soaked in pitch. The ship stretches long and lean, its bow rising in a graceful curve. Eventually, it will be crowned with a carved prow, a dragon, perhaps, or a snake, or something more abstract, designed to strike fear or reverence in the eyes of those who watched it come over the horizon. A standard longship, like a skeed, could carry dozens of warriors, along with supplies, weapons, and sometimes even livestock. But there were many types of ships: smaller carves for coastal work, broad nars for cargo and trade, each built with purpose, each honed by tradition. The sail, often dyed deep red or striped, was square, made from wool, and treated with animal fat or fish oil to resist water. It wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. It caught not only the wind, but the gaze of those on shore. A Norse ship under sail was a message: we are here. And they were fast, astoundingly so for the time. A well-built longship could travel at speeds up to 10 or 12 knots, with both sail and oar. It could navigate open seas, but also glide up narrow rivers, where no other European ship dared go. The draft was shallow, allowing the vessel to be hauled over land if necessary. This mobility changed everything. Because of their ships, Vikings could raid a monastery at dawn, be gone before midday, and vanish into the mist before any army could respond. Because of their ships, they could explore Iceland, Greenland, even reach the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. But longships were not only for warriors. Some carried settlers, others carried pilgrims, some carried the dead. In a Viking ship burial, the deceased, often a chieftain or noblewoman, would be laid in a boat with weapons, jewelry, food, tools, and sometimes animals. The ship was then covered with earth, forming a mound that echoed the curve of a hull. To die in a ship, or be buried in one, was to continue your journey beyond. Ship carvings appear on stones and monuments across the Norse world, from Norway to Scotland to Ukraine. In their mythology, too, ships played a role. Naglfar, the ship made of dead men's nails, was said to carry the giants at the end of the world. The very sea itself was imagined as a path, not a barrier. Even today, when we imagine Vikings, we see not just axes or horned helmets, though those, too, are often misplaced. We see their ships, sleek, gliding, silent, except for the wind and the oars, cutting across misted waters like shadows. They did not build these ships casually. They were crafted with reverence, with patience, with skill passed down from father to son. A good ship was a thing of pride. A poor one could mean death. As you stand now on that imagined shore, watching the final peg hammered into place, you understand. This was not just a vessel. It was independence. It was destiny. It was identity, carved into wood. Now, the tide rises. The finished longship is pushed into the water. It shudders, floats, steadies. Oars are taken up. And just like that, the ship is gone, swallowed by the horizon as easily as a breath. In our next segment, we leave the wood and wind behind and enter the world of belief. What did the Norse see when they looked at the sky, or the snow, or the still surface of a fjord? What gods did they worship? What omens did they read in the stars? We'll explore the strange and beautiful world of Norse cosmology. Settle in now Let the rhythm of the waves fall away. Let the creaking of wood and clash of iron grow distant. We're moving not through space now, but through belief, into a world imagined by minds, shaped by fjords and forests, storm and silence. This is the world of Norse cosmology. To the Norse, the universe was not one realm but many, 9 worlds, all connected by a great tree called Yggdrasil. Picture that tree now, towering, eternal, with roots that curl into dark places and branches that scrape the heavens. Its bark is thick and furrowed, alive with wind and whisper. It is not a symbol. It is a living structure, the axis of existence. At the center is Midgard, the world of humans, Earth to you and me, but surrounded always by the unknown. Beyond Midgard lies Asgard, the realm of the gods. Golden halls, vast feasting tables, high towers, but not untouched by fear. The gods, even at their most powerful, know that the end will come. They are not immortal in the sense of modern myth. They are simply enduring until they aren't. And then there is Jotunheim, the land of giants, not always malevolent, but chaotic, unpredictable. Frost giants, fire giants, beings of vast size and older magic. Niflheim, a land of ice and mist, cold beyond imagining. It is said one of Yggdrasil's roots reaches here and there. A great serpent gnaws endlessly at its bark. Muspelheim, realm of fire, blazing, untamed, the domain of Surtur, the fire giant who will one day set the world ablaze. Then there's Vanaheim, home to the Vanir gods, associated with fertility and nature, once at war with the Aesir of Asgard, but later allied through an uneasy truce. There's Alfheim, land of the light elves, beautiful, radiant beings who flit between shadow and shine. And Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, the land of the dwarves, master craftsmen who forged Thor's hammer, Odin's spear, and other divine artifacts. Finally, Helheim, ruled by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki, a realm for those who died not in battle, but of illness, old age, or accident. It was not a place of torment, but of stillness and shadow. This was their world, vast, layered, mysterious. But at its center was not merely geography, but fate. The Norse did not believe in free will as we think of it. They believed in Wyrd, a kind of destiny, spun and woven by 3 sisters, the Norns. Their names were Urd, what was, Verdandi, what is, and Skuld, what shall be. They sit by the roots of Yggdrasil, weaving the fates of men and gods alike. Even Odin, the All-Father, could not escape what they wove. This understanding of fate gave Norse stories a unique melancholy, a kind of noble sadness. The gods knew they were doomed, that one day Ragnarok would come, the twilight of the gods, a final battle, the sky torn open, the world set ablaze, the tree shaken to its roots. Odin would fall, Thor would fall, Loki would break his chains, a wolf would swallow the sun, and yet the gods fought anyway. That was the point, not to avoid the end, but to face it with courage, honor, and clarity. This idea echoed in daily life. A farmer might till rocky soil, knowing it might never yield enough. A sailor might kiss his children goodbye before launching into a storm. A warrior might go into battle not expecting to survive, but to earn a place in Valhalla, where the chosen slain would feast and fight again in Odin's great hall until the end. Valhalla was not paradise in the soft sense. It was celebration, repetition, readiness. Every day, training for the last fight. Every evening, meat, mead, and stories around the hearth. But it wasn't the only afterlife. Some spoke of Folkvanger, ruled by Freya, where half of those who died in battle would go instead, Others whispered of being lost at sea, their spirits joining the endless tide. In Norse cosmology, the sacred was not separate from the everyday. A tree might be Yggdrasil's echo. A raven might carry Odin's gaze. A ring of mushrooms in the woods might be the footprints of elves. Even now, you can see traces of this belief system in the names of the days. Tuesday, Tyr's Day, for the god of law and war. Wednesday, Woden's Day, or Odin's. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Freya's Day, or Frigg's. The myths were passed down not through books, but through skalds, poets, singers, memory keepers. By firelight, in longhouses, on icy nights, they told tales of wolves that swallowed the moon, hammers that struck giants down, and gods who gave up eyes for wisdom. And perhaps, as you lie now with your eyes closed, listening quietly, you feel just a hint of what they felt. That the world was wide, that it was full of strange corners and secret meanings, and that though fate might be written, how one faces it, that perhaps was still a choice. In our next segment, we'll return to more earthly things, to the Norse passion for games and leisure, surprising glimpses into joy, community, and even competition amid a life of toil. Let your breath settle. Let your mind drift gently away from the clamor of raids, the press of chores, the weight of the long winters. Even in the hard lives of the Norse, there was laughter. There was play. There were moments of warmth beside the hearth, when stories unfolded and games passed long, dark hours. Tonight, let's sit in the longhouse. The fire burns low, casting shadows on timber walls blackened by decades of smoke. Outside, the frost bites at the thatch. But inside, someone tosses a carved bone die, and someone else begins to sing. This was leisure, Viking style. Vikings loved games, and not just for children. One of the most famous is Hnefatafl, often called the King's Table. It's a strategic board game, a bit like chess, but older and asymmetrical. One side has a king and defenders, the other side, attackers. The king must escape to a corner square while the attackers try to trap him. It's clever, slow-paced, and deeply satisfying. You'd sit across the table from your opponent, squinting through smoke and shadows, weighing each move like a warlord. The pieces? Sometimes stone, sometimes carved antler or bone, smooth to the touch, cool in your palm, worn smooth by years of use. Children, too, played simple games, throwing bones, racing, chasing each other through pastures. On icy days, they skated on bones strapped to their feet or played in the snow while parents worked inside. Words were treasured in Norse society, not only in sagas, but in leisure. Vikings told riddles, often clever and earthy, passed around the fire to test wit and humor. A riddle might compare a ship to a fish, or a sword to a song. The answers were never obvious, and laughter was guaranteed. And then there were verbal duels, called flightings, where two people would insult each other in rhyme and meter. It might sound unfriendly, but it was sport, like rap battles of the medieval world. A chance to show cleverness, not cruelty. One might boast of slaying a beast or out-drinking a jarl. Another might respond with tales of swimming icy rivers or clever tricks that fooled a rival. Exaggeration was part of the fun. In the stillness of evening, with the day's work done and cold settling over the village, the longhouse would quiet. Then, the skald, the poet, would begin. He might speak of Thor's battle with the serpent, or Odin's sacrifice, hanging from the world tree for 9 days to gain wisdom. He might tell of a local warrior who sailed west and never returned. The listeners would murmur, nod, perhaps close their eyes. These sagas weren't just entertainment. They were memory, identity, religion, and pride. To know the sagas was to know your place in the world. Songs were sometimes chanted, sometimes sung softly. The melodies have been lost to time, but the rhythm remains in the surviving texts. Alliteration, meter, and flow, like waves on a northern shore. Sometimes, people sang work songs while threshing grain or rowing the longship. Other times, lullabies rocked babies to sleep while wind creaked the rafters. Not all Norse gatherings were small and quiet. Some were loud, full of mead, meat, and cheer. At sacrificial feasts, called blots, communities came together to honor the gods. There was eating, drinking, toasting, and the telling of many tales. Drinking horns were passed from hand to hand, and with each toast came a promise. One for Odin, one for family, one for the future. It wasn't all about indulgence. These gatherings reaffirmed social bonds. Who sat where? Who toasted whom? Who remained silent? All of it mattered. Even so, laughter was part of it. Children played under the benches. Old men slurred songs half forgotten. The smell of roasted lamb mingled with pine smoke and brewing mead. You might imagine yourself there, tucked between friends, fire warm and full, listening to an elder speak of giants, gods, and the great winters of long ago. And so, in the world of the Norse, there was space for joy. It might not look like our leisure. There were no novels, no screens, no theaters. But there was story. There was play. There was poetry. And as the fire dies low and the last verse fades, you can still feel it. The soft pulse of a culture that valued cleverness as much as courage. In our next segment, we'll slow even further as the world grows colder and darker, and discover how the Norse survived the endless night of winter. Close your eyes now and picture the northern sky. There is no sunlight. Not really. Only a faint bluish glow at midday, more like twilight than day. The stars seem to hang lower here. The cold doesn't bite. It settles, like a weight over your shoulders. This is winter in the Viking world. Long, relentless, quiet. Imagine yourself waking before the sun, though you haven't really seen it in days. You rise slowly from your bedding, a layer of fur and rough wool. The longhouse around you is dim and hushed. Only the soft crackle of an overnight fire breaks the silence, and the breath of sleeping companions forms tiny clouds in the air. Winter isn't just a season here. It's a way of life, a shaping force. The Norse people didn't fear the cold exactly, but they respected it. You had to. You had no choice. There were only a few short months of warmth to grow food, to harvest, to gather what you would need to last the rest of the year. By the time the snow returned, and it always did, you needed everything in order. A miscalculation could mean hunger, or worse. You step outside, and the wind greets you like an old rival. The world is pale, quiet, blanketed in snow. Footprints from yesterday's tasks have been filled in. The nearby stream has frozen over. The air is so still that you can hear a raven's wings flapping far off in the trees. Chores don't stop in winter. They become slower, colder, heavier. You break the ice to water the animals. You carry firewood back into the longhouse, piece by piece. You mend tools, spin thread, carve wood. Every movement matters. Every calorie burned is felt. Inside, the hearth is your center. The room smells of wood smoke, dried fish, wool, and warmth. This is where people gather. Stories are told here. Quiet songs are hummed. Simple meals, root vegetables, porridge, salted meats, are shared in the flickering firelight. Time stretches differently in winter. Days pass slowly, marked not by sunlight, but by rituals and habit. You might mark the passing of weeks by the food supplies, by how many smoked fish remain hanging, or how much barley is left in the sacks. You learn to be patient, still, attuned. For the Vikings, the winter months were a spiritual time too. In the deep cold and the long dark, the old gods felt closer. The barrier between the living and the unseen world, between Midgard and the realms beyond, thinned. Some feared the Draugr, restless spirits of the dead, believed to roam the earth in the cold months. Others whispered of Odin's wild hunt, a ghostly procession that rode across the sky on stormy nights. A glimpse of it was a bad omen, but staying inside, by the fire, offered safety. So you stayed indoors when you could, listening to the winds speak against the walls. Elders would talk of past winters, some worse, some easier. They'd tell you of the Fimbulvetter, the great winter said to precede Ragnarok, the end of all things. 3 seasons with no summer in between, snow upon snow, ice upon ice. A warning, perhaps, or a myth, but always taken seriously. And yet, despite the hardship, there was beauty. On clear nights, the sky shimmered with green light. The northern lights, flickering like spirits dancing just above the treetops. You'd watch them in silence, your breath steaming, your heart quiet. They didn't need explanation. They simply were. Inside, winter made people draw close. Families huddled together. Children listened to their grandparents' voices, learning the sagas. The sound of weaving, of wooden tools scraping leather, of fire crackling. These became the rhythms of life. The snow muffled everything else. There were festivals, too. Not loud, but warm. Yule was one of them, a time of midwinter celebration, to mark the turning of the year, to hope for the return of light. Evergreen branches were brought inside. Fires were lit. Toasts were made. It was a moment to remind each other that the sun would return. That life, even under snow, waited just beneath the surface. And so, as winter stretched on, the Vikings endured it not just with strength, but with memory, with tradition, and with quiet community. You might feel the weight of those long nights even now, the peace of them, the hush, the sense of being surrounded by something ancient and still. And when the first hints of spring finally came, when the snow began to melt and the sky held just a touch more gold, it wasn't met with shouts or feasts, just a quiet nod, a deep breath, and the knowledge that once again they had made it through. Let yourself settle now. As we turn our attention inward, into the heart of the Norse household. The longhouse is warm with the smell of stew simmering over the fire, the soft rhythm of a spindle twisting thread, and the steady hush of footsteps moving purposefully across packed earth. In this world, often imagined through the lens of warriors and sailors, there is another presence just as powerful, just as essential. The women of the Norse world. They do not fade into the background. They are not simply waiting at home while ships disappear on the horizon. No, they are the structure of the home, the keepers of continuity, the force that turns survival into daily life. Quietly, constantly, you wake early before the men rise and begin your work. Always more to do. The hearth must be tended, embers coaxed to flame. Bread, made from rough ground barley or rye, is shaped and baked on flat stones. Butter is churned and sour milk stirred to make a cheese that will last through winter. The goats need milking, and the wool must be washed. Spinning is not a quiet pastime. It's a requirement. Thread is needed constantly for weaving clothes, repairing sails, stitching shoes. And it is the women who spin the threads that hold every household together, quite literally. In Old Norse, the word for wife, husfreyja, means lady of the house, and it is not a ceremonial title. It is authority. She manages the food stores, the servants, the rhythms of the seasons. If the men are gone to sea, she becomes the acting head, making decisions, trading goods, even defending the farm if necessary. And there were farms, many of them. The Viking world wasn't all longships and mead halls. Most people were farmers, and in many households, it was the women who oversaw the daily operations. They organized planting and harvest, preserved food, managed livestock, and kept records, often orally, of debts, favors, and family histories. You can see her now, standing in the doorway, keys hanging from her belt. This was not just ornament. It was a sign of control. The key ring held access to storerooms, pantries, locked chests of valuables. In many ways, she held the infrastructure of the household in her hands. Her world was not small, though it may seem so from the outside. Marriage in Norse society was practical, often arranged, but women had rights unusual for the time. A woman could own property, inherit land, and even initiate divorce. If her husband mistreated her or failed to provide, she could leave him and take her dowry and part of the shared property with her. This wasn't romantic freedom, but it was autonomy, a recognition of her role. And there were some who went further still. Graves tell us much. There are burials of women with swords, not many, but enough to raise questions. Were they warriors? Leaders? Perhaps. But even more revealing are the graves filled with high-quality tools, looms, weights, keys, scales, and imported goods. These women weren't forgotten villagers. They were powerful matriarchs, influential in trade and household management. Others, known as Volor or seeresses, held a different kind of power, spiritual. They traveled from settlement to settlement, offering prophecy and ritual. Clad in richly adorned garments, carrying staffs, they were both revered and feared. To invite a vulva into your home was to invite fate itself. And yet, for most women, daily life was a cycle of work and rhythm. The feel of wool beneath the fingers, the sting of smoke in the eyes as bread bakes, the weight of responsibility, not dramatic, not sung about in sagas, but enduring. She raises children, comforts the elderly, prepares herbal remedies from gathered plants. She tells the sagas just as the skalds do, but within the family, within the circle of firelight. And when the men return from voyages, if they return, it is she who holds everything steady. She who knew how many sheep were lost to wolves that year. She who rationed the grain when the snows lasted too long. She who repaired the linen, patched the walls, and stitched together the everyday. So much of Viking life depended on her. And yet, like thread and cloth, her presence disappears into the fabric of history. Essential, but nearly invisible unless you look closely. Tonight, you've looked closely. And now, as we drift onward through this quiet journey into the Norse world, we can carry the steady presence of these women with us, behind the scenes, beside the hearth, spinning time into survival and silence into memory. Let the world around you grow still. As we now follow not warriors, nor farmers, nor seers, but merchants, traders, travelers, quiet agents of transformation in the Viking Age. For all the stories of battle and conquest, There was another side to Norse expansion, less sung about, less bloody, and far more enduring. Commerce. The Norse world was deeply connected. From the icy fjords of Norway to the rivers of Rus, from the emerald coastlines of Ireland to the marketplaces of Baghdad, the Norse people moved goods, ideas, and silver across a continent, not with armies, but with sacks, scales, and quiet negotiations held over worn wooden tables. Imagine yourself aboard a shallow-drafted Viking Nar, not a sleek warship, but a cargo vessel, sturdier, broader. Its hold filled not with weapons, but with furs, soft, thick pelts from Arctic foxes and reindeer, folded carefully into bundles. Next to them, barrels of dried fish, bundles of walrus ivory, coils of rope, sacks of wool, horn, and amber from the Baltic shores. You sail slowly along the coast, then upriver. The sail is patched but sturdy. You know the winds, the tides, the places to avoid. You know which villages offer safe harbor and which demand a toll. You know that your voice matters more than your sword here. In your pouch, silver coins clink softly. Some bear Arabic script, dirhams from far to the southeast, gained through exchange in markets you've never even seen. Others are hacked, cut into pieces for easier trade, weighed on small folding scales, carried in a leather case. At your side, a quiet assistant, perhaps your nephew or a trusted friend, handles the ledger, not on paper, but in memory. A tally of what was sold in Hedeby, what still remains, what the next town might want. You arrive in a riverside settlement, not a grand city, just a modest gathering of traders, their tents set up in the frost-thinned grass. Smoke rises gently from their fires. They greet you with cautious nods. They've seen your ship before. Trust is slow, but it grows. Your wares are laid out. Fur for salt, dried fish for pottery. You eye a glimmering glass bead, perhaps from the Frankish kingdoms, and offer amber in exchange. No one raises voices. No one rushes. This is not conquest. This is a rhythm, as familiar as the tides, and the rhythm reaches far. The Viking trade network stretched astonishing distances, not by design, but through careful steps, connections built over generations. Norse merchants carried wool to the east and returned with silk. They brought honey and beeswax south and returned with spices and colored dyes. They traded with the Khazars, the Volga Bulgars, the Byzantines. And they did not only trade goods, they traded knowledge, stories, words, tools, ideas. In the market towns of the Dnieper, they met people speaking languages they did not know. But still, the deals went on. Gesture, custom, shared need. There were codes, expectations. Even in unfamiliar lands, there were ways to conduct honest trade. In some places, Viking merchants settled. The Rus, a Norse term, would give their name to Russia. Along the rivers and the steppes, Norse traders built wooden forts that became cities. They did not arrive with force. They arrived with goods. And in time, became part of the land. Back home, the silver they returned with transformed villages. A farm might grow into a market town. A longhouse might gain a finer roof. A daughter's dowry might include imported jewelry. Small, gleaming proof that the world was wider than the horizon. Not all Vikings were merchants, but many were. Quiet, tireless, adaptable. They didn't need to sing their own praises. Their success was measured in the coins they stacked, the trust they earned, the roots they memorized and passed down to their children. And so we leave them now, not on a battlefield, but by a smoky riverside, tending to their boat, warming their hands over a low fire, as a deal is struck beneath the fading light. This, too, was the Viking world. And now, as the sun sinks behind distant hills and a hush settles over the fjords, we come to a quiet chapter in every life, the final one, a moment of transition, a farewell marked not by grief alone, but by ritual, by preparation, by deep belief. In the Norse world, death was not an ending. It was a passage, a journey into another kind of realm. And like any journey, it required careful preparation. Picture a small village wrapped in twilight. The people gather, slow and solemn. A life has ended. Perhaps a chieftain, a farmer, a child. The breath has stilled. The body lies wrapped in wool and linen. The air is filled with the scent of pine, of soil, of wood smoke drifting up in thin ribbons. There is no rush now. There is only ritual. Depending on the person's status, the burial might be simple or something far more elaborate. You see, for the Norse, the soul, the hugr, lingered. It was thought to remain for a time among the living, so care had to be taken to appease it, to ease its transition, to ensure that the dead would not return unhappy, nor wander in unrest. For some, cremation was the norm. A pyre was built, logs carefully stacked, the body placed atop it with tokens of their life: a sword, a spindle, a cup, a brooch, a game piece, perhaps even the bones of a faithful dog. As the flames climbed, the smoke rose upward, carrying the soul, it was believed, toward the afterlife. The ashes would be gathered, placed in a mound, sometimes marked by stones. Over time, these mounds would dot the landscape, soft hills shaped by memory. Others were buried in the ground, often with grave goods. Coins for passage, tools for work, jewelry, weapons, cloaks, all laid around them like whispers of who they were and how they wished to be remembered. And then, for the elite, there were the ship burials, the most dramatic of all. Imagine a ship, a real vessel, pulled ashore and laid in the earth. In it, the body is placed, often seated or reclining, surrounded by precious goods, weapons with gilded hilts, carved combs and beads, imported silk, antler tools, finely made textiles, drinking horns. In some rare cases, even sacrificed animals or servants, symbols perhaps of service in the afterlife. The ship is then buried under an enormous mound of earth, a grave fit for a life well lived, or a legacy too large to fade quietly. The symbolism is clear. The ship is a vehicle, carrying the dead to the next world. But where exactly? The Norse had many ideas of what lay beyond. There was Valhalla, the hall of the slain, a vast and echoing hall presided over by Odin. Only those who died bravely in battle might enter, carried by Valkyries to drink and feast and fight once more each day, only to rise again. But Valhalla was not the only place. There was Folkvanger, Freya's field, a gentler afterlife where half of the battle dead were said to go. And there were more peaceful destinations too, places for those who did not die in war, realms beneath the earth, halls across distant seas. Some tales speak of Helheim, not a place of torment, as later Christian notions might suggest, but simply the realm of the dead, cold, silent, ruled over by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki. It was a place of stillness, of memory, not punishment, but a kind of quiet forgetting. The Vikings did not fear death in the way we might think. It was part of the cycle. The world itself, they believed, was destined to end. In Ragnarok, the great unraveling, even the gods would die, but life would begin again, from the ashes, from the soil. In the meantime, Those who passed on lingered, in dreams, in the echoes of their names, in the goods they left behind, a comb worn smooth by use, a brooch still gleaming beneath centuries of earth, a sword rusted but unmistakable in shape. These things tell us what mattered, who was loved, what was feared, what was hoped for beyond the grave. So tonight, as we imagine this quiet world, we see not only its daily rhythms, but the depth of its remembrance. The way the Norse honored their dead, not with silence, but with care, with goods, with song, with earth piled high in tribute. And perhaps even now, beneath the green hills and still fjords, they are waiting, not gone, only sleeping. As you settle deeper into stillness, let your mind drift now, not through space, but through time itself. Not clock time, not hours and minutes ticking by on metal hands, but the kind of time that the Norse people understood. Time as it was marked by stars, by frost, by the return of birdsong, and the slow warming of soil beneath bare feet. To live in the Viking Age was to live by the rhythm of the earth. There were no calendars on the wall, no smartphones to tell you it was Tuesday. Time was told by what you could feel, what you could smell, what you could see blooming in the hedgerows or gathering in the sky. The Norse year was divided not into 4 seasons as we often imagine, but into 2, summer and winter. Summer was the season of life, of activity, of travel and trade. Winter, the season of stillness, of inward turning, of hearth fires and long nights. Each season began with a significant festival, carefully marked with ritual and gathering. The Norse calendar was lunar, but grounded in observation, in keen awareness of natural change. Let us walk quietly through their year. The Norse summer began with a festival called Sumarmal, summertime. It took place around what we would now call mid-April. The ground would be thawing, birds returning, boats dragged down to the shore. People would mark it with offerings to the gods, especially Freya and Freyr, deities of fertility and growth. This was the beginning of the working year. Fields were planted, wool was sheared, paths reopened. The days grew long, the midnight sun casting an eerie glow in the far north. Time felt stretched. Sleep came late. The people stayed outdoors. They fished, hunted, mended, gathered. Children played in bright meadows. Elders told stories with their feet in cool streams. Then came midsummer, celebrated with fire, St. John's Eve, as it later became known. Bonfires crackled on hilltops. People leapt across flames, danced in circles, cast herbs into the fire to keep sickness away. Though much of this would be absorbed into Christian practice later, the roots ran deep. And just like that, summer turned. Harvest came, with baskets, blades, and tired backs. Then slowly, the sun dipped lower, and winter crept in. Veternetter, winter nights, marked the end of summer. Held in mid to late October, it was not a single night, but a period of transition. People gave thanks. They made offerings to the Disir, ancestral spirits, particularly female. It was a time of remembering the dead, of acknowledging the unseen. Then came the true dark, Yule, what we now call Yule, was the great winter celebration. Held around the winter solstice, it lasted for several nights, possibly as many as 12. Fires were kept burning, meat roasted, ale brewed. It was a time of feasting, of surviving the long dark together. Ghosts and spirits were thought to roam freely during Yule. The wild hunt, Odin's spectral procession, might be seen streaking across the sky. People stayed close to home. They honored their ancestors with toasts, songs, and silence. Time seemed to pause. Snow hushed the land. Children listened at the doorways, wide-eyed, for hoofbeats in the snow that no one else could hear. As the sun began its slow return, so too did the people stir again. In late January or early February, Thorablot, Thor's feast, marked another turn in the wheel. This was a communal event. Songs were sung. Strange and fermented foods were shared. Sour ram's testicles, blood pudding, and cured shark among them. All offerings to Thor, the protector, the thunderer, who watched over the cold months. And so the cycle would continue. No days named after emperors. No weeks counted on paper. Just the thawing of moss. The shifting scent of pine. The way the light fell a little longer through the thatched roof. They named their months not after numbers or Roman gods, but after what was happening in the world. Goa, Harpa, Skerpla, Einminútur. Some of these names have faded. Others linger in Icelandic calendars, even today. And what is time, truly, if not the pattern of return? The Norse people did not rush their hours. They did not count minutes. But they knew deeply when it was time to sow, to feast, to mourn, to wait, to hope. Their lives were not ruled by time. They were part of it. And perhaps, tonight, as you listen, far from fjords, far from bonfires or ale, a part of you too can feel that ancient rhythm and let it rock you gently towards sleep. As you lie still now, let your thoughts drift to a different kind of sound. Not the clash of weapons, not the howl of the wind, but the rhythm of voice, low and steady, echoing in the glow of a hearth fire, the voice of a skald. In the Norse world, stories were more than just entertainment. They were memory. They were instruction. They were how the past remained alive, not in books or ink, but in the mouths of those who remembered. The skalds were poets, composers, chroniclers of kings and warriors, but they were also guardians of language, of lineage, of honor. In a world without widespread writing, the skald was not simply a performer. He was a living archive. Imagine yourself now, seated on a carved bench in the long hall of a chieftain. The smell of roasted lamb still lingers in the air. Ale sloshes in carved horn cups. The fire crackles. Shadows dance on the timber walls. Then, silence falls. All eyes turn to a man standing near the center, perhaps older, wrapped in a dark wool cloak. His voice begins, low at first, then rising and falling like the tide. He does not read. He recites. What you hear is not random rhyme, nor simple song. Skaldic poetry was intricate, woven like a knot. It followed strict rules, complex meters, dense metaphors, and kennings, those poetic nicknames used to describe the world in unexpected ways. The sea, for instance, was called the whale road. A ship might be a sea steed or a wave horse. Blood might be referred to as battle sweat. A sword could be a wound ice. This was not to be clever, but to honor tradition and to sharpen memory. These metaphors were like markers on a map, anchoring the poem in a web of associations. The skald's performance was an act of preservation. Through his verse, the deeds of a king would become eternal. The fall of a warrior would echo through generations. He would not just be remembered, he would be spoken of again and again. In this way, history was not recorded, it was relived. The best skalds were attached to the courts of powerful rulers. They might serve a lifetime in one hall, or travel between chieftains, offering poems in exchange for hospitality and patronage. Their words could secure favor, or insult, could elevate a man's legacy, or bring it low. Skaldic poetry was often composed on the spot, improvised within the rules of form. This required astonishing memory and fluency. The skald had to know not just hundreds of verses, but thousands of names, events, genealogies, and traditions. But not all storytelling was so formal. In the quiet homes of farmers and fishermen, stories were told more simply, passed down from grandmother to child, from father to son. Tales of the gods, of Loki's tricks, Thor's temper, Odin's endless quest for wisdom. Tales of trolls and sea serpents, of lost travelers and cursed gold. Evenings were long in the north. The dark settled early, especially in winter. The warmth of the fire brought people close together, and storytelling became the heartbeat of the home. There were no special effects, no glowing screens, just the voice and the memory it carried. Some stories were meant to amuse, others to teach. Children learned of bravery, patience, and humility not through lectures, but through tale. A clever fox, a boastful warrior, a clever servant outwitting a greedy master. There were also sagas, longer stories, sprawling and rich. These sagas weren't written down until centuries later, but they were composed long before, passed mouth to mouth like precious heirlooms. The saga of Egil, the saga of the Volsungs, the saga of the Greenlanders. Each one a deep well of memory, identity, and meaning. To be a Norse storyteller was not just to entertain. It was to carry something sacred, a thread of memory that stretched backward across stormy seas and broken battlefields to the ancestors, and forward to the listeners sitting quietly at your feet. Even today, these voices are not entirely gone. Their words, once spoken aloud in smoky halls and snowy fields, now echo in libraries and classrooms, and perhaps quietly, even now in your ears, half heard through the hush of night. So let your breath slow and your mind soften as the words of long-gone skalds drift through time and wrap gently around you. Their stories are done for now, but the memory remains. Let your mind drift now, not to warriors or gods, but to something quieter, something gentler, to the slow unfolding of a childhood in a world both harsh and beautiful. Imagine, if you will, the early morning chill in a Norse village. A low mist rolls over damp grass. Sheep stir. A woman stokes the fire with practiced hands. A child curls deeper beneath a woolen blanket, not quite ready for the day to begin. This is the world into which a Norse child was born, neither romantic nor cruel, simply real, filled with tasks, with learning, with laughter, and with long silences beneath a vast northern sky. Children were precious, not in the sentimental sense perhaps, but in the way that each new life promised continuity, survival, future. In the early years, babies were swaddled and kept close. Mothers nursed them when possible, or they were given milk from livestock. If the household was large enough, older siblings, or even grandparents might help raise them. Names were often given to honor ancestors, a way of inviting the strength and memory of the dead into the life of the living. Sometimes, a child was named after someone who had died recently, as if the soul had returned. And then, quickly, came the work. Even small children had chores: gathering kindling, fetching water, chasing birds from the fields, watching younger siblings, feeding animals. There was no concept of childhood as a separate phase of life, free from responsibility. But this didn't mean there was no joy. Children played with carved wooden toys, with stones, with sticks, with their imaginations. They wrestled in the grass, climbed rocks, told stories, made up games. In winter, they slid over frozen streams on bones strapped to their feet. In summer, they followed goats into the hills, laughing at their antics. They listened, always listening to the songs of their elders, to the cautionary tales by firelight, to the whispered warnings about trolls in the forest or sea spirits in the waves. Education was oral and practical. Boys learned from fathers and uncles how to mend a net, how to shape wood, how to spot a change in the weather. Girls learned from mothers and grandmothers how to spin flax, how to tend the sick, how to brew and bake and keep a home running when the men were away. These roles were flexible, more so than one might think. A clever child might be apprenticed to a skald, a smith, or a healer. A brave girl might be taught to use a blade in case of danger. Skills mattered more than strict categories. There were no schools, but there was constant learning. And there was loss, too. Childhood in the Viking Age was fragile. Illness could sweep through a village in days. Accidents, hunger, exposure. A family might lose one child, or several, and carry that grief quietly for the rest of their lives. Small burial mounds dot the Scandinavian countryside, silent markers of names half remembered. But when a child survived, when they grew tall and strong and began to take their place in the fabric of the village, it was cause for quiet pride, a shared, unspoken relief. And in that growing up, there was a kind of rhythm, a passage from helplessness to contribution, from watching to doing. The seasons shaped them. The long dark of winter taught patience. The labor of summer built endurance. The stories taught courage. The chores taught discipline. A Norse child knew how to listen, how to wait, how to endure, how to smile in the face of hardship, how to find wonder in small things. The glint of a fish in the shallows, the first snow, the voice of a parent calling from the fields, and when night fell, and the fire was banked, and the sounds of the world grew quiet, the child would lie down on a straw-filled mattress, wrapped in wool, with a carved animal tucked under their chin, and they would sleep, as you may sleep now, wrapped in memory, in warmth, in the hush of time moving slowly forward. Tomorrow, there would be work, there would be learning, there would be laughter and pain, and the slow, patient making of a life. But for now, there was only stillness, and now, our journey draws to a close. You've walked long, quiet paths through frostbitten mornings, stood beneath the roof beams of smoky longhouses, watched sails rise above cold gray waters, and listened to stories whispered through the hush of time. You've witnessed the rhythm of Norse life, not the battles sung by sagas, but the steady, persistent heartbeat of ordinary days, of fishermen and farmers, of skalds and smiths, of women weaving and children chasing chickens through muddy yards, of bread baking, of fires crackling, of wind brushing the grass just outside the door. Through it all, you've moved gently, unhurried, like a guest sitting quietly in the corner of a centuries-old room. This was never a world of ease, but it was one of resilience, of memory, of people shaped not only by hardship, but by the way they endured it, with humor, with skill, with story, with song, and in some way, by listening tonight, by allowing their voices to reach you across this strange bridge of time. You've honored them. If you're still awake, thank you for walking this path with me. And if sleep has already taken you, that's perfectly fine too. That's what this is for. As always, if you'd like to, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It always amazes me how far this quiet little circle of history lovers has grown. So rest now. Let the sounds of the longhouse fade. Let the waves of the fjord still, and let yourself drift. like a small boat on calm waters toward morning. Until next time, good night.